Today we're going to be talking about the two forms of reproduction that are used by all organisms on the planet. And those two forms of reproduction are asexual and sexual reproduction. So we're going to kind of look at both of them. We're going to weigh the pros and cons of each and then talk about what organisms would use a certain type because it's more advantageous for them. So I'm going to start by kind of laying things out here. We're going to put asexual reproduction over here, and we're going to put sexual reproduction over here, and we're going to divide our board in half here, and then we're going to divide it again, and I'll tell you why we're doing all this as we go through. But we're going to start by looking at asexual reproduction. Okay, we're going to see, why it would be good or why it would be bad. Okay, the nice thing about asexual reproduction is it only involves one parent, so you only need one individual to make a copy. Right, you just take one cell and it becomes two cells. Okay, and so that's a really big advantage. You don't have to go searching around trying to find anybody. If you're a single-celled organism, you just divide yourself in half, and you now have everything you need. You have become two cells. So it's a fairly quick process. Okay, and it allows organisms wherever they're at to make copies of themselves. So that's one big advantage for asexual reproduction. Because there's only one parent, it is rather quick. Okay, it is quick because you don't have to go searching for a mate. You don't have to do any of those types of things. You simply are going to just, wherever you're at, boom, make a copy of yourself. It also does not require much energy. So there's not a lot of energy expended looking for a mate. There's not a lot of energy, that goes into the process itself. It's just kind of very quickly done and over with. And so because of all those things, in a stable environment, you can rapidly create a large population. So an organism can move into an area that is basically devoid of any organism. In a very short amount of time, one cell becomes two, and two becomes four, and so on and so forth. And before long, you have a very large group of organisms living in an area. Okay, so asexual reproduction, like I said, it definitely has its advantages. There are some drawbacks to the process as well. It's not all good things. When you look at that list, you're like, that's a lot of good things. It's quick. You only need one parent. Why isn't everybody doing this? Right? Why isn't everybody undergoing asexual reproduction? Why don't humans undergo asexual reproduction? Right? If it's so quick and easy, and we can make all these things happen in such a short amount of time. But there are. So this was our list of advantages. Now we'll make our list of disadvantages. Okay? And there are a couple, but they are pretty big. Okay? One is we have a limited ability to adapt. And what I mean by that is to adapt to changes in the environment. Right? So if something comes along, these organisms, they are all clones of one another, right? Because we set up here, one of our advantages is one parent becomes two. So we create a clone. And a clone, if a drought comes along, it's going to kill all of them. So that inability to adapt, these organisms face a massive die-off scenario if those conditions change, right? Another thing to look at it too is I think I use it with my students. I say, how it says that on some type of disinfectant or cleaners, it says it kills 99% of all germs and bacteria. Okay, that's because they're all clones. Now, the company leaves that 0.01% on there just to be like, well, we said it wouldn't kill everything, right? But it kills most everything. It's because they're all clones. So if something is introduced into this environment that kills one of them, chances are it's going to kill all of them because they have no genetic differences. They're all exactly identical. So if there's a drought and they're all not very drought resistant, they're all going to die. If there's disease that's introduced and that disease kills one of them, chances are that disease is going to kill all of the members of that particular population. So even though it's quick and easy, Okay, the drawbacks, the disadvantages are pretty big in terms of, is your species going to survive? And that's really what all organisms are trying to do. Is the species going to withstand all of the things that the environments can throw at it? Because survival of the species is what most organisms are after. They're not aware of it, but everything that they're doing is really kind of just pushing to propagate that species, to make that species expand more, and to keep it alive as a species. So let's jump over to sexual reproduction. Okay, I want to start with disadvantages. For sexual reproduction. Okay, one of the big disadvantages is you need a lot of time for sexual reproduction. Okay. Now, whether that's the time can be spent in a lot of different ways. A gestation period, right? If two individuals they come together, they bring their genetic material together, there's usually a gestation period, right? Whether it's a human or an elephant or whatever, and even an organism laying eggs, it takes time. Also, you've got to factor in the time that it takes to find a mate, okay? And so that's going to require energy. Because if I'm an organism that lives in an area where there are not a lot of members of my species, let's say I live in the desert and I'm a male lizard and I've got to find a female lizard of my species, it may take me several days in order to do that. And then when I do find that female, I have to convince her that we're the same species and that she wants to have my offspring. So there's a lot of time and a lot of energy invested in that. Whereas, we get exponential growth with these asexual reproduction. With sexual reproduction, we're going to produce small populations, right? We're just going to be getting, in most instances, a few individuals that are going to be being produced. Now, the difference would be like fish, right? Like fish are going to lay like thousands of eggs, but out of those thousands of eggs, only a few of them are going to reach adulthood. Most of them are going to be eaten while they're still eggs or die at very young ages. And then the last disadvantage is the need to find a mate. So this can be a lot of different things. It can be time consuming. You can use a lot of energy. Depending on the species, this could even be deadly, right? If you're a male in a particular species where you have to compete for the right to breed with females, you may battle another male, and during that battle, you may be mortally wounded. Okay, and that's something you've got to deal with every mating season. It's either that or you just leave and decide you're not going to mate. But a lot of those organisms, their driving desire is, like I said, to preserve that species. It's kind of just ingrained in them that they have to breed. So they're going to fight the biggest, strongest males for the right to breed. And in doing so, like I said, they may be killed. So, some pretty big disadvantages. It's slow, and then even though it's slow, you get these small populations. You could die. So now we're going to turn to the advantages. So if all these things are so bad about sexual reproduction, why do so many species do it? Okay, and the reason is the end result is you get variation. We're talking about genetic variation. Okay, genetic variation far outweighs any of the disadvantages of sexual reproduction, and it far outweighs any of the advantages of asexual reproduction. When you have genetic variation, if we look at the disadvantages of asexual reproduction, the limited ability to adapt, we can adapt because we're genetically varied. The massive die-offs, not going to happen because, again, we have genetic variation. So because of that variation, we can deal with changes in the environment, right? If our environment changes, throws us a curveball, we can adapt to that. Some individuals may die off, but not all of them will die off. Plants reproduce sexually. That's why they attract pollinators. Okay, so some plants have a little bit more drought resistant than others. Some plants have a little bit more resistance to certain diseases than others. Most species, especially when we're talking about our large complex species, they go out of their way and risk life and limb in order to reproduce sexually. They do some pretty crazy things to make sure that the genetic material from one individual gets mixed with the genetic material from another individual. And they don't know why they're doing it, right? It's just kind of ingrained within their DNA that they're going to do this. When, talking about the males who may die because they're trying to find a mate. Those females don't know. They're just, they just want to pick the male that wins. But what they're doing so by doing that is the organism that has the best traits for that species is the one that's being allowed to reproduce. So his genes, his traits that make him a superior lion or a superior water buffalo or whatever the case may be, his are the ones that are passed on. And so those good traits that make him a good specimen are going to be the ones that are propagated throughout that entire population. So like I said, there's lots of good and bad and everything, but when you really boil it all down, when you're looking at all of this genetic variation right here for sexual reproduction, it takes the cake. This is what species are after, okay? Because it ensures that their species is going to survive as a species. It ensures that their species isn't going to get wiped out when something comes along. Now, if this organism over here, this one of these asexually reproducing organisms, does get wiped out, it's not a big deal because they get wiped out and maybe there's a couple of them left over, right? Out of 1 million, there's 2 of them that survived. Well, those 2 can start undergoing asexual reproduction and get right back to where they were in a short amount of time. So it works well. These systems work well for the organisms that utilize them. Asexually reproducing organisms are very small things, single-celled things, bacteria, and you can't really argue that bacteria hasn't done a good job. We have forms of bacteria that have been around on the planet for 3.5 billion years, and they're still here. Okay, so obviously for organisms like ourselves, asexual reproduction wouldn't work, okay, because we don't want something that can kill one of us to kill all of us. But for the organisms that utilize asexual reproduction, it's a very effective method. For the organisms that utilize sexual reproduction, it works very well for them. So these are the 2 types of reproduction, and again, depending on the organism, one's going to be better than the other, but for most creatures that we see and most organisms that we know of, sexual reproduction is the preferred method.